Well, welcome back to narratology. This is the second sort of bonus episode almost, talking about Melchizedek. So I'm here with Matthew.
Hey guys.
And so we're talking more about Melchizedek, this mysterious character who showed up in Genesis 14, and then shows up again in Psalm 110, talking about the Genesis 14 interaction. Those are the only two times in the whole Hebrew Bible that he shows up.
Then he vanishes.
And he's just kind of very mysterious, right? So if you haven't heard those episodes, look back, listen to those episodes first. It's really important as we're talking now about this. But yeah, those two episodes really give a good backbone for where we're going with this one. But this is meant to sort of be an add-on to our conversations in Genesis as we talk about Melchizedek, because he is a very mysterious guy. But David, in his psalm, brings up the structure of who Melchizedek was to compare him to this future Messianic king. And then the author of Hebrews takes this and runs with it even further and compares the structure of Melchizedek's priest-king title and stamps that onto Jesus. And so we get to kind of think about this and look through this as well and see how the book of Hebrews is trying to kind of show this. So I'm very excited. I
am too. And also, this is, I think, our very first foyer into the New Testament.
Yeah, we don't spend much time in narratology talking about things in the New Testament. So this will be interesting.
Yeah.
And this is, disclaimer, this is not meant to be a deep dive into the book of Hebrews.
No, not at all. Maybe later. Give us a few years.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? We'll see. But this is more meant to serve as a complement almost to what we've been talking about in Genesis. And so our goal is to kind of look at this thing in Hebrews with the lens, with our Old Testament lens, and see kind of how we can figure out what this author is trying to do.
Yeah. Double bonus.
Yeah, it's great. So let's dive into the book of Hebrews.
Let's go.
It's going to kind of be the end of chapter 4 through 7. And so there's a lot to cover, and we're not going to look at every single word, but we're going to kind of pull from the themes that each section is talking about. And so there's 4 kind of different sections that focus on Melchizedek and talking about Jesus as the great high priest. So, yeah.
Should we read it?
Let's just kind of take it section by section, I guess.
Yeah.
Because if we were just to read it all, we'd be here for 10 minutes. Just listen to it. Which,
glorious.
That'd be nice. But, I like to kind of take it, piece by piece, so we can really kind of digest it well.
Chunks are better.
It's like taking a steak, and do you just shove the whole steak in your mouth, or do you cut it up? And
no, yeah, I cut mine.
Yeah, I totally cut my steak. I don't just take the whole thing and just shove it in my mouth.
So if we were to take this first chunk out of this steak,
the first sort of cut,
this high cut steak of Hebrews. Yes. Where do you want to cut from?
So this is Hebrews 4, starting at verse 14 and bleeding into chapter 5. And it says, it's talking about Jesus. Since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. So he brings up that Jesus is a high priest. This Hebrews author brings up Jesus is the high priest. So he makes this claim, and then he's going to spend the rest of the time backing up this reality, this author.
Yeah.
So then it says, let us then, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace. So now there's this throne element where the author is bringing up that they're not only a priest, but a king.
Similar to Psalms.
Yeah.
110.
And so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Then it gets into chapter 5 and says, for every high priest chosen from among men is appointed to act on behalf of men in relation to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. So the author is bringing up this. So they're talking about who a priest is, what they do. Yeah. And so they're appointed to act on behalf of men in relation to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. This is what a priest did.
Yeah.
So trying to say like, this is what a priest did. And then we can say, it kind of goes a little further that the priest has weaknesses, right? Because they're human.
Yeah.
And so not only do they have to make sacrifices for the people, they also have to make a sacrifice for themselves because they're human and they sin. And that's just sort of their reality.
That's their role.
Yeah.
But the difference here is Jesus never sinned.
Yeah.
And he's also king. So how does that factor into this?
Well, that's what we'll see, which is, it's so good. So this person, this priest, they're not supposed to exalt themselves. Yeah. This is what this author says. But instead, the honor's only going to go to God. This is in verse 4.
Yeah.
And in verse 5, so also Christ did not exalt himself. So Jesus didn't exalt himself, right? But he was appointed to be a high priest. So he didn't do this for himself, but God appointed him to be a high priest. Which
is in line with how the rest of the high priests were chosen in the past. They were appointed?
Yeah, so they were appointed.
Yeah.
And so in the same way, Jesus has the same role of not choosing this for himself, but being appointed to do this. And so it brings up Psalm 110. It says, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. And he says also in another place, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Right? So we see, actually that first part was in Psalm 2.
Okay.
Sorry. So we got Psalm 2, but then it brings up this Psalm 110 thing, right? Yeah. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. And so it says, in the days of his flesh, Jesus, he offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverence. And although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered, and being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obeyed him, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Ooh, so much.
Yeah.
And so he's bringing up this reality, right, that the Levitical priests, they were broken, they were human, they were not eternal.
Yeah.
And so they had to cover the sins for themselves and for the people. But Jesus was different, right, because he has this eternal nature, and he also was carrying on this sort of priestly role, and he was actually a source for eternal salvation. So not just almost temporal salvation through sacrifice in a sense, but that he was a source of eternal salvation because of his sacrifice of himself ultimately.
The eternal sacrifice.
Yeah. And so this is after the order of Melchizedek, right? The same language that David uses, where not trying to say that Jesus is related to Melchizedek.
Sure. He's related to David.
Yeah. But he's trying to say that the framework of Melchizedek, which is priest king, that same order we find in Jesus himself. Yeah. Super cool.
That is really, is there any other instance in the New Testament where Melchizedek comes up, or is it just Hebrews?
It's just in Hebrews.
Huh.
Yeah, it's nowhere else.
Wow.
And so he shows up in 4 different sections in the book of Hebrews, but still nowhere else in the entire New Testament do we see Melchizedek. Super, super strange, but very important to this Hebrews author.
Yeah,
was this character.
Definitely makes you think through a lot of things.
Definitely.
What is a high priest and a king at the same time?
Melchizedek.
And what does that look like through the confines of doing it perfectly?
Yeah.
It definitely makes you ask a lot of, I feel, deep theological questions.
Totally.
Especially about Jesus and who he says he is.
Yeah, definitely. So that's kind of the first section.
Yeah.
We could go so much further in, but frankly, there are people more qualified to do so. And for the sake of time, let's keep churning through this. So this is the second section, which is Hebrews 6, verses 13 through 20. And this is all about the fact that this is called the certainty of God's promise. And the author of Hebrews is trying to use the story of Melchizedek to show the unchanging nature of God. Specifically the promises of God. Mm-hmm. And so they're highlighting this unchanging nature, right? And so we see that even in verse 13 it says, For when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself, saying, Surely I will bless you and multiply you. And thus Abram, having patiently waited, obtained the promise. For people swear by something greater than themselves, and in all their disputes an oath is final for confirmation. So when God desired to show more convincingly to their heirs of the promise of the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. So very dense.
Yeah.
But the key words there are unchangeable.
Yeah.
Right. So God is saying, I have this unchangeable promise, but I really want to show it. Right.
So I'm going to swear by myself.
Yeah. And I'm going to swear by myself, and I'm also going to show this blessing in a few different ways. Right. So we see it in chapter 12 of Genesis. We also see it in 14, right, where God reaffirms this unchanging promise.
Through Melchizedek.
Through Melchizedek, right. And so we can see we have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, right? This is the Holy of Holies.
Yeah.
Where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, right? The high priest, that's high priest language right there.
Yeah.
On our behalf, the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies. And so we see that Jesus has gone in as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a great high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. They throw in the little Melchizedek thing again.
Yeah.
Right? Where Jesus, he comes in and he is a part of that reaffirming promise.
Yeah.
Right? That Melchizedek, he serves as this continued affirmation of the promise made by God. And Jesus, in the same way, among many, many other things, he also serves the same promise of reaffirming the promise of God, right? And so in this way as well, he is a priest in the order of Melchizedek.
Wow.
So this Hebrews author is trying to use, they're taking more of like a logical sort of argumentative stance to try and not just say Jesus is the high priest and a messianic king / high priest. It's not just going to say it and leave it, but they are actually going to say it and try and back it up. And so they're creating a theology for the priest king and what that looks like. So they're giving you a little crash course. So this is really interesting.
I like it.
Yeah, right?
I like crash courses. My brain works well with those.
Yeah, it's helpful.
I tend to crash a lot.
Yeah. There's a lot of crashing when it comes to trying to figure out what the biblical text is saying. Yeah, there's a lot of crashing. So,
dang. Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around just the implication of all of this. Like you were saying, it's really dense.
Yeah,
there are definitely more qualified people than us to talk more about
100%. With everything, but especially this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I kind of just want to take that time to like kind of place an importance on like, this is a big deal. Mm-hmm. This is a very big deal about what it says that Jesus is.
Yeah.
By him being the high priest.
Yeah, totally.
It's also, I don't want to speak wrongly here, but I'm going to say something anyway. So if it's off, just let me know. But
that's how every great sentence starts.
Yeah, great. But it just reminds me of how like people who would enter into God's presence in the Holy of Holies, if they were not clean, they would die. Right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they would go behind the curtain, and it's just interesting to see how Jesus went into that place, died, and then was resurrected for us as well. Not because he was unholy, but he was the holiest, and now he's like...
Sure. But he took on the sin of everyone.
Yeah. He himself was the sacrifice. He was not the person making the sacrifice, but he also is the high priest making the sacrifice. You
of
know?
himself.
Yeah.
Well, right, because
Yeah.
it's the fact that Jesus was in full power and knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah.
And he was in control.
Yeah.
When he was on the cross, he was in full control of what was happening, right? And that ultimately, it was him who, in a sense, let go of his own life.
Yeah.
And
As a sacrifice.
yeah, as a sacrifice. And it was not the hand of the Roman government that ultimately stopped his heart from beating, right?
Yeah.
That it was ultimately Jesus who, in full control, said it is finished.
Yeah. It reminds me of, we just watched Passion of the Christ.
We did.
And,
Oh my.
Yeah. Oh my. But what Jesus says to, was that actually Pilate? They never use his name in the movie, but I think it was Pontius Pilate at the top of the stairs. And he says,
Yeah, I think
he
it
who
is.
gave you this authority, something along the lines of like, God allowed you to have this authority.
Yeah.
Like that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that whole
Same.
whole reality that who's really in control right now.
Yeah, he's like, I could definitely not do this if I didn't want to,
Yeah.
but I'm going to.
Yeah, and in the garden he says, "Not my will, but yours be done, Lord."
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And that ultimately is a tie back all the way back to Genesis 3, right?
Mm.
Where you're in a garden and there's people who are saying, "My will and not yours, Lord. My desire is not yours, Lord."
Man.
But in the garden, Jesus flips it.
Yeah.
And this final sort of test in the garden, Jesus says, "Not my will, not my desires, but your desires be done."
As he's sweating blood.
Yeah, right. Which is like the ultimate, the ultimate fulfillment of the Edenic story,
Yeah.
right? Where they were fully focused on their own will,
Yeah.
but Jesus says, "Not my will."
Man, what a good high priest.
Yeah, what a great high priest,
Ugh.
right? One that doesn't have to sacrifice for his own sins.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
Totally wicked.
I don't know, I would encourage anyone listening to just really take some time.
Yeah.
Go find a quiet field. Go find a tree somewhere. Maybe go to a beach and just think about the actual weight and value of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot there.
These texts were set up for us to do that.
Yeah.
You know, it's not set up to be a cookie cutter verse on a poster kind of thing,
Yeah.
you know, but it's set up to be something that we really chew on and think about. And ultimately it takes a lifetime
Yeah.
of not fully getting there.
Yeah.
And that's the point, is it's supposed to be something where you continually just sit with.
Yeah.
And do ultimately what we're doing right now, right? Which is just sitting and talking about it and ending with the reality that you're like, oh man, I don't even feel like we got everything. And then both of us are going to listen back to this episode like 5 years from now. Be like, dude, we didn't even say anything that we like, or we might have like different thoughts or all kinds of different things. And we're like, man, did we even like scratch the surface?
Yeah.
You know? And that could be just like 5 years from now.
Yeah.
And then you think like even more time down the road and you're like, man, we really were like just scratching the surface. And so, yeah, it's just interesting to see how this text is set up for us to do that.
Is there any other key things in here that you think we should highlight?
In Hebrews?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're halfway.
Oh, we get to keep going?
We get to keep going. Yeah.
Let's
Isn't
go.
this so great? So yeah, now we get into chapter 7. Chapter 7 is like the bulk. Okay. So this is the bulk of what we're seeing. So this is the priestly order of Melchizedek is the title of this.
He's in the title.
Yeah, so the author is trying to create a description of Melchizedek as king in kind of the beginning of this. So it says, for this, Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings, which is great, and he blessed him. And to him, Abraham apportioned a 10th part of everything.
Talking about tithing, just like in Genesis 14.
Right.
Yep.
So it says, he is first by translation of his name, King of Righteousness. So the author's literally defining the name. They're going through the Hebrew, Malachi and Sedek.
Yeah.
They're going through that and saying, first, King of Righteousness. And then he is also King of Salem. That is King of Peace. Right? And so this Melchizedek, he is King of Righteousness and King of Peace. which we talked about in the Genesis thing. But
Yeah.
this Hebrew author, that they're doing the same thing, right? They want to define who this person is, right? Because it's important.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of mystery, but there are some things that we do know about him, and those are important. So then they said, he is without father or mother or genealogy, which is something to consider, right? Because he's just kind of a mysterious dude.
Yep.
Having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever. Wow. So almost at like a very, I don't want to say shallow view,
Sure.
but very 30-foot view of this. You could say, well, is he saying Melchizedek never freaking died? I don't think that's the case.
I think he's just drawing importance to, hey, like what we were talking about in the episode, there's no genealogy.
And that's the point.
Yeah,
the point is the author of Hebrews is trying to get us to not think about the fact, oh, what if Jesus was a descendant of Melchizedek?
Yeah.
Right? They're not trying to get you to think about the historical nature of Melchizedek. They're trying to get you to think about the metaphorical nature of who Melchizedek was.
And how he was introduced.
Yeah, that's ultimately the biggest thing.
Yeah.
And so this author, what they're doing is they're separating Melchizedek from any sort of historical anything. And I think that's also, when you think about the Hebrews text, there was no historical nature to the character of Melchizedek. So really this character has no historical setting, and this Hebrews author really wants to set that in stone. And so they're saying, no genealogy, no father or mother. We don't know when Melchizedek was born, when he died, because it's not the point.
Yeah.
It's not the point. So then it says, see how great this man is, right? To whom Abraham, the patriarch, gave a tenth of his spoils. The patriarch, Abraham, the patriarch, like the top dog, tithed to the even topper dog. Yeah.
The
and
king dog.
Yeah. And so those descendants of Levi who receive the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is from their brothers. So we see that there's this like familial thing because they're all end up being descendants of Abraham. And so the tithe is almost like a familial thing, right? And so in the same way that a church is seen as like a family of people, all brothers and sisters in Christ, that as you tithe to your church, it's a familial giving.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's that real like connection to tithing and giving money and family. It says, but this man who does this, this man who does not have his descendants from them receives tithes from Abraham and blesses him who had the promises. He's like, this random guy receives a tithe with no familial tie, with no systematic tie at all. He receives a tithe from Abraham.
That is odd.
Yeah.
Especially if Abraham has never met.
Yeah. And so it's supposed to be kind of out there and kind of weird.
Yeah.
You're like, well, yeah, why is that the case?
Why would he give him a tenth of
Yeah.
what he has? His spoils, as they would say.
Yeah.
Huh. All right, let's press on. I'm curious.
Why would this happen? It is beyond dispute, this is verse 7, that the inferior is blessed by the superior. So the author is making a theology for blessing by saying blessings only occur from a superior to an inferior.
Yeah. We mentioned this as well.
Yeah, so we mentioned this, that they're saying that Melchizedek is actually more superior than Abraham, the patriarch, right? The one who should probably be receiving the tithes is actually giving a tithe in this sense. It says, in one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. It's kind of a weird, wacky
He wasn't born yet.
Yeah, but there's this whole idea that I think it's just continuing the sort of familial nature of tithes.
Yeah.
Right? That that Levi himself, who received tithes, paid tithes through Abraham. So that Levi, the descendant of Abraham, who received tithes from other descendants of Abraham, is like paying these tithes through Abraham to Melchizedek.
Huh.
So there's almost this.
There's a timeless aspect to it.
Yes, there's this, and that's what they want you to get at, is that this is not a historical theology.
Which is what Jesus does.
Yeah.
There's a timeless.
Yeah. Is that there's all this like sort of shuffling through that all these tithes end up going back to Abraham in a sense, because he is the patriarch of it all.
Yeah.
And that as Abraham tithes to Melchizedek, he is making this tithe for him and his people, which continues to elevate Melchizedek, right?
Yeah,
because he is the superior,
yeah.
blessing the inferior.
If he's the high priest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is sort of really elevating Melchizedek
Yeah.
for who this guy actually is.
It's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. Because you're like,
with how little you know about
yeah. Yeah. But that's sort of what they're trying to do.
Huh.
Is they're really just taking the structure of Melchizedek being a priest and a king,
Yeah.
and jumping off the notion that he is superior to Abraham and using that to create a framework for Jesus, which is what this author is going to do in the next section.
So it seems like this takes us to the pinnacle of the comparison of Melchizedek to Jesus.
Definitely. And just before we get to the very end, remember, we're scratching the surface. And this is something that as we're talking about this, like, oh my, this is something that I could have, I'm not saying like I could have spent more time with it, but I could, right?
Yeah.
You know, and there's always that thing of like, because this is set up to be, in a sense, some kind of meditation literature, even though this is a very like logic and argumentative style, but it's still something that we're like, oh, what does that really truly mean? You know, and this is inspired by God.
Yeah.
And so, there's this whole, it's so dense. Yeah. And so as we're going through this and you're probably listening, you're like, but they didn't mention this. And it's like, man, you know, that's...
Let me just give you guys some context for what we didn't mention. In between breaks, our eyes are basically exploding.
Yeah.
We're looking at each other and just going,
whoa. Yeah.
What? Yeah.
Yeah, so...
There's a lot here.
Oh, yeah.
We are not covering all of this.
Definitely.
At all.
So the last section, this is the longest one. It's Hebrews 7:11 through 28.
Oh.
And this is what I'm calling the meat and potatoes.
Nice.
Of this connection from this Hebrews author of connecting Jesus to Melchizedek.
Meat.
The section is Jesus compared to Melchizedek.
And potatoes.
So here we go. Oh, this is so much, but let's just do it. It says, now, if perfection had been attained through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, rather than one named after the order of Aaron? So this author is bringing up like, well, the entire Levitical priesthood was based on the reality that priests lived and priests died, and priests were not perfect, right? And so one priest dies and another high priest comes up. And that was based on that reality. But they're saying like, but there's this whole other side where if someone was of the order of Melchizedek, right? The one that's not of the order of the Levitical priesthood, right? Because the Levitical priests were not kings. And so what the Hebrews author is saying, Jesus, was not of that system of the Levitical priesthood. What if they're instead of the order of Melchizedek, which has this more eternal nature to it?
Predating, in a sense.
Yeah, right?
I mean, it is predating the Levitical priests. Melchizedek was.
Yeah.
It was before Jerusalem.
But it's like there's this whole new system that came up.
Yeah.
That was separate from Melchizedek's system.
Yeah.
From the system that he was in.
Yeah.
And all that, although that one worked for the Israelites, it was not the system that Jesus was confined to.
Huh.
He was of the order of Melchizedek, which we'll talk about. So I feel like all the time with this, we're just saying something like, which we'll talk about.
Yeah,
we'll get to that.
No.
Because it's just all like, oh, it's all together. It's all there. So it says, verse 12, for when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. For the one of whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe from which one has ever served at the altar. It says, for it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, and in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests.
Okay, hold
So this
on.
is confirming that Jesus was not of the Levitical line, right? The Levitical priesthood was remember, that was a whole tribe.
Yeah.
And so that tribe was set up to be priests.
Whoa.
Jesus was a part of the tribe of Judah. And so he was not set up to be people in his line were not set up to be priests.
Yeah.
But Jesus specifically was set up to be a priest. So specifically a high priest.
You guys can't see this on the audio podcast, but I just have this huge grin on my face right now.
Yeah. Isn't that so wacky?
Yeah, that's nuts.
Right? This author is saying, Jesus, his genealogy.
Huh.
He's not of the Levitical priesthood. So why are so he's got to be different. Right? He's not of the priesthood that we've traditionally seen.
Yeah.
So he's got to be from some sort of other order, some sort of other way of being a priest. And what's the really only other way that we see? The most prominent one? The order of Melchizedek.
I'm just imagining Jesus as a kid in the temple, just reading through, this order of Melchizedek. Like what was going through his head. I have no idea. I can't speak to that, but I don't know. That's because I feel like we just blow by this stuff.
Yeah.
You said, "Oh, you guys know the line of Jesus." Do we though? Do we really know?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe. But even you think okay, if his ancestor was David was not.
Yeah, yeah.
He was part of the line of Judah.
Yeah.
And so you see how, and this is what a lot of times the writers in the Bible, especially in the New Testament, they're writing to you like you know the Old Testament most of the time.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times their audience is people who have the Hebrew Bible saturated in their bones, right? It's people like if, I don't know, in middle school I listened to a lot of Taylor Swift, okay?
I don't blame you.
Yeah, I think we all did, right? And so it's imagine if, you came up to me when I was in middle school and you started talking to me using Taylor Swift quotes. It's an odd example, I would be totally in line. Yeah, there you go. Or for example, The Office.
Okay.
I watch a lot of The Office. Who doesn't, right?
Me.
But if you were to talk to me and quote something from The Office, or talk about a character from The Office, whatever, I would be totally. Maybe that's for you. But if you were to talk about that, then that would be something that I would be fully in tune with,
Mm-hmm.
And so it's we already have this base set of understanding, and we can work off of that.
Yeah.
And so if you talk to me about how Toby Flenderson might be the Scranton Strangler, someone else who doesn't watch The Office is like, what the heck are you talking about?
Did that guy just make up a chain of words?
Yeah. But if you watch The Office and you're a fan of The Office and you've, seen that episode a few times or whatever, you'd be like, oh my gosh, yeah, let's talk about it. So it's that whole idea that this author of the book of Hebrews, they're not assuming that but they're working under the idea that you have some sort of understanding.
They're going off the foundation of the biblical text.
Which is important then for us to also create that foundation, because and then as we're supposed to be readers of the scriptures, that our goal is then to do the same thing, to come to the table with some sort of understanding, hopefully.
Yeah.
But then that's also the multifaceted view of the Bible, right?
Yeah.
Where you don't have to have a full understanding to get something out of it.
But the more understanding you have, the more you get out of it.
Yeah. So much, man.
Man.
Isn't that so good?
Yes, this is too good.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. So we got to keep going though.
Yeah, we should.
So it says, this is verse 15 of chapter 7 in Hebrews. It says, this becomes even more evident, this idea that Jesus was not of the Levitical priesthood line. This becomes even more evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become a priest not on the basis of legal requirement concerning bodily descent, but by the power of the indestructible life. So this author is saying, this becomes evident when we see Jesus as a high priest, not because he is a descendant of the Levites, but strictly because he is eternally God, because of the power of the indestructible life, right? And so this author is saying that this is ultimately almost more evidence, right? That this priest, Jesus, is not from the Levitical line, that they're from the order of Melchizedek. Not saying that he's from the line of Melchizedek, but the structure, the metaphor of who Melchizedek was.
What that priesthood stood for.
Yeah. Totally. And so the author uses a line from Psalm 110.
Hey.
Saying, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, right? We know that line.
Yeah.
And so it's... So this is essentially, almost they're using this to give more evidence.
Yeah.
Saying that Jesus is a priest forever.
Yeah. It's like, hey, look what David said.
Right? Well,
Priest
look what
forever,
David
guys.
said about the future Messianic king, and look how Jesus is fulfilling that role. Right? And that's why this psalm shows up so frequently, because it's creating a framework for the future Messianic king. Yeah. And then what does Jesus do? He fulfills that framework. Yeah. And Jesus ends up being a priest forever. In the same way that Melchizedek held this role of being the priest king, right? Without being constrained to a genealogy or whatnot. So, man.
Rich.
Dude, so rich. It says...
like hot cocoa.
Yeah.
But more.
Yeah. With like heavy cream instead of 2% milk. We take like one sip and you're done. You know? Yeah.
I can't.
No. Okay, let's keep going. This is verse 18. For on the one hand, a former commandment is set aside because of its weakness and uselessness. For the law made nothing perfect. But on the other hand, a better hope is introduced through which we draw near to God. This better hope is this priest forever. Yeah. Right? This is what Jesus did in the Sermon on the Mount. He said, I came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Yeah. Right? This is this better hope. Says, and it was not such without an oath, for those who formerly became priests were made such without an oath, but this one was made a priest with an oath by the one who said to him. So this is actually saying that God, as opposed to other ones who never had an oath associated with their priesthood because they were a part of the descendants, right? They were set up to be that way. Yeah. That Jesus was set up by an oath. And then they use the Psalm 110 passage again saying, you are, or it says, the Lord has sworn. The Lord's created an oath, right? And will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. Yeah. So the line right before is actually the same verse 4 specifically of 110. And so they use this idea to say that God has set up Jesus to be the eternal priest, the eternal high priest, the great high priest, where other people were set up because they were born to be set up, but Jesus was set up because he was appointed by God to do that.
Brett, I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I'm thinking a lot of Noah.
Okay, interesting.
Ark of the Covenant. How God made a covenant with Noah. And I don't know why this kind of feels similar to that. With how God... I don't know if you're tracking with me, but how God made an oath that that Jesus will be a priest forever.
You know,
I think the only thing that maybe is similar
there is, I guess, a covenantal nature, right? And I think that's what you're kind of tapping into is the fact that Noah had a covenant given to him by God. Yeah. Because he was righteous and because he followed the commands of God. and God wanted to use him as a righteous person to continue his story, continue the familial line.
Yeah.
And I think in the same sense, God makes a covenant to Jesus, to himself, to continue this promise, right?
Wow, that's just
and
so
in
layered.
Yeah, so in a sense,
that's cool though.
Yeah, there is a similar idea, right? Where
he's promising to himself. Well, it's the oath that we already talked about, the oath nature of how God swore on himself.
Yeah. The Lord has sworn and will not change. You are a priest forever. So God has sworn that Jesus will serve in the high priest role.
I think that's why it gets so heady, is now you're talking triune nature of God. And that's...
Well, yeah, that's where things get real crazy.
We're gonna fall apart so quickly.
Yeah. But to kind of sum this up.
Yeah.
I think the Hebrews author knows that things are getting a little jumbled up. This is verse 22. This makes Jesus the grantor of a better covenant. Right? And so this covenantal language we're talking about, they're trying to get you to think about that, and they're saying, this makes Jesus like the receiver of this better covenant, right? And they continue, the former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing office, right? They were people. They died.
What? Dang
it. But he holds his priesthood permanently.
At the right hand of God.
Yes.
As king as well.
Because he continues forever. Where humans don't continue forever in their current office. Jesus continues forever in his office of being the high priest. Oh my. Yeah.
You took another sip of that whole milk hot chocolate.
Oh man. So verse 25 too. It says, consequently, he is able to save to the utmost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them.
I don't know why, but this is highlighted in my Bible.
So Jesus is part of his service as the high priest is to be the intercessor between God and man, which he is himself God, which is that whole triune nature of God thing again. Yeah. But the idea that Jesus dying on the cross, being the sacrifice for us, ends up being the
pathway to God.
Yeah, right? He ends up being the intercession that allows us to have a relationship with God hand in hand, without any barriers, without anything.
It's a final sacrifice.
Because of who Jesus was and his sacrifice that he made. Wow. And so that ultimately him being the sacrifice and the high priest is something that allows him to be the high priest forever and allows us to have the ability to have a relationship with God.
Man.
Yeah.
It takes already very important elevated statuses. King, priest, sacrifice. And it says, now here's the pinnacle of all of those things in one person.
And that's what Hebrews does.
Yeah.
Hebrews is really designed, especially we see the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11.
Yeah.
But Hebrews is really designed to get you to see Jesus is the pinnacle of all of these people that we see, right?
Yeah.
All of these ancient Old Testament figures that we see that were elevated highly and then messed up. And that keeps happening, with Noah and with Abraham and with Moses and with David and with Solomon. You go down the line, every single person, they were elevated and then they mess up. But the author of Hebrews is saying all these people, Jesus is the truer and greater version of all of these people in all their different ways, right? And so Jesus is the truer and greater high priest over every other high priest system that the Israelites tried to create. Ultimately, Jesus is the true permanent high priest. And Jesus is the truer and greater any theme or person that was brought up in the Hebrew Bible. Dude.
Oof.
Yeah. So much.
Oof.
So Hebrews is dense, but it's so nuanced and so beautiful.
Bold writer,
Yeah,
bold author.
definitely. So we're getting towards the end. We're in the last few verses.
Yeah.
It says, "For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest, right? Holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners,
Amen.
and exalted above the heavens." Right? We need this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We need this high priest who is 100% man, 100% God as well. That's separated from the sins that we commit, and that can ultimately truly fulfill the high priest role that we really need. Which is why the permanence nature of the sacrifice of Jesus is so important and is so contrasting to the temporal nature of the sacrifices of the high priests. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't help just, but every time after each verse we read, just be like, man.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I think the fascinating thing for me, just reading through this right now, I couldn't tell you the last time I read this, but it is core Christianity.
Oh yeah.
This is Christianity.
Yeah.
But also to just see it so meticulously fleshed out.
Yeah.
So dense as well.
Dude, yeah.
In just a few chapters, it's just like you're getting hit like right in the side.
Yeah.
Sentence after sentence, and you're just like,
yeah.
oh, again, like,
well,
whoa.
And it's taking the idea that, we can just say Jesus is the high priest, but this is showing that Jesus is the high priest, you know? And it's taking that full idea that you can say all kinds of phrases, and sometimes we do that a lot, but to back it up, to really show the full complexity of that statement is really beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah. And so let's just keep going, right? Jesus, the eternal, permanent high priest. We see verse 27. He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily. Right? He has no need for the Levitical priesthood system to do things daily, to temporally atone for the sacrifices. He has no need to do this, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of his people, since he did this once for all when he offered up himself. All right, for the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests, but the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. Mic drop, but not actually. I don't want to drop this mic.
Yeah, they're kind of expensive.
Yeah, but oh my, this permanent priest has no need to sacrifice anymore. Why? Because they were the perfect sacrifice set apart from the old system. Because this high priest Jesus, he didn't have any sin. He had no need to atone for his own sin.
Yeah.
And so he can be the forever priest that we need. So dense.
Third sip
of the
whole milk.
Whole milk or heavy cream hot chocolate. Right, so much. So
I don't know, if you're listening to this for the first time, starting Hebrews, it's pretty light reading.
Yeah. This is one of those things where, if you want to create a more robust theology of phrases that you just sort of throw around, or people that you sort of kind of know a little bit about, but not really much about, I suggest go to Hebrews and spend some time in it. Maybe buy a commentary online or whatnot, whatever you want to do. There's all kinds of really, really good ones, and just sort of sit with it, because I think it could actually really help in your overall reading of Scripture.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you guys some homework too.
Whoa!
If you made it this far, if you find a good commentary, share it. Put it in the comments.
Yeah.
YouTube. Put in podcast. This is the point. We want to encourage you guys to share what you're learning.
Yeah, definitely.
So if you find something that you come across, we'd love to read it, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brett's better at reading than me, but
hey,
I'm learning.
There you go. Yeah. So that's what we got.
Yeah.
That's Melchizedek, man. He's so nuanced for the 3 points in Scripture where he shows up.
It's amazing to see how so few references can pack such a heavy theological punch.
Oh yeah.
To who Jesus is.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
Love it.
So there we go.
Make yourself some hot chocolate tonight, folks. Read your Bible.
Yeah. There we go. And that's the beauty, is that, we say this all the time, but the goal of this is to ultimately get you to think, man, that's like really cool.
Yeah.
How can I go see this for myself?
Yeah.
That's ultimately what we're trying to do.
Yep. That's what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
And it's a blast.
Yeah. So thanks for listening. This is something we love to do, and we hope that this is something that you love to listen to.
Yeah.
If you made it this far, then that's probably, hopefully, slightly the case.
Yeah.
But feel free to share this, and feel free to, continue to stay with us on this journey. We're going to hop back into Genesis and look at the covenant that God makes with Abram. So
we love having you guys on the ride. So stick around.
There you go.